A billionaire walked into a nursing home to make a donation. But he stopped when he saw an elderly lady and said, "I know that look. Is that you, Mum?" And what happens next is astonishing. The October sun was shining over the pavement as Mark Collins parked his Audi in the visitor's slot at Green Meadows Living Centre. He adjusted his navy blue tie, ran a hand over the grey at his temples, and took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. The rear-view mirror reflected his face. Small wrinkles around his eyes were the only evidence of his 45 years. Everything else about his appearance was immaculate, as always. 20 minutes, he thought, checking his watch. I'll hand over the check, take a few photos, and get back for the 2 o'clock meeting. The nursing home wasn't what Mark had expected. Instead of smelling like disinfectant and having dismal hallways, the place greeted him with softly colored walls and ambient music. The reception resembled a mid-range hotel, clean, welcoming, with no extravagance. "Mr. Collins, welcome to Green Meadows." A middle-aged woman wearing a name badge that read Susan approached him with a warm smile. "The director is finishing a call. Would you like some coffee while you wait?" "Thank you, Susan." Mark smiled, though his mind was already on the next meeting. The $20,000 check in the envelope in his pocket was just another item on his day's to-do list, the annual donation from Collins Enterprises to local institutions. Good for taxes, even better for the company's image. While waiting, he observed the bulletin board filled with photos of smiling seniors engaged in various activities: gardening, painting, board games. Susan noticed his interest. "We try to keep everyone active here," she explained, adjusting her brightly colored frames. "Mr. Peters over there, the one wearing the hat, is 92 and still beats everyone at chess." Mark nodded, feigning interest. Janet's voice and his assistant echoed in his mind. "Show interest, ask a few questions. The local press will be there," he was following orders. "And how long do most of them stay on here?" "It varies a lot. Some arrive needing temporary care and end up staying once they realize they're not alone." Susan flipped through a folder. "Mrs. Sanderson has been here for 12 years. She's practically our mascot," she laughed, pointing to a white-haired lady in the center photo. Mark glanced at his watch discreetly. 15 minutes. "And that lady?" he asked, randomly pointing to another picture on the board. "Oh, Margaret Ellis. She's been here for 2 years. Such a sweet lady." Susan smiled affectionately. "Her son comes around often. He never misses a week. It's beautiful to see that kind of devotion." For a second, the entire world stopped. Mark felt as if someone had punched him in the stomach. His mouth went dry instantly. "Margaret Ellis?" he repeated, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. "Yes, she's the lady in the garden photo. In fact, she's probably out there now. She likes to knit under that apple tree." Mark swallowed hard. It had to be a mix-up, of course. Margaret Ellis wasn't such an uncommon name. It couldn't be. His Margaret, his mother, lived on the other side of the country, in a simple house with a porch where she used to wave goodbye when he left, so many years ago. "Do you happen to know where she came from, this Margaret?" Susan looked at him curiously, but before she could answer, a door opened in the back. "Mr. Collins, I'm Gloria Winters, the director of Green Meadows. Please, come with me." Mark stood automatically, but his mind was elsewhere. "One moment, please. I need to check something in the car." Without waiting for an answer, he headed for the side door that led to the garden. His heart pounded so strongly it felt like it might burst from his chest. A stone pathway led to a well-tended green area, with benches, flower beds, and a few trees. And there, under an apple tree with just a few remaining fruits, sat an elderly lady, rocking gently in a chair, knitting. Mark stopped, frozen. Even at a distance, he would recognize those hands anywhere. The same hands that once held his when he was a child, that dried his tears, that waved goodbye the last time he saw her. His legs carried him toward her before he realized he was moving. He stopped a few steps away, unable to go further. The lady lifted her eyes from her knitting, sensing his presence. "Good morning," she said with a polite yet vacant smile, the same smile she might give any stranger. Her eyes, the same brown eyes Mark saw in the mirror every day, showed no hint of recognition. "Good morning," Mark managed to reply, his voice barely a whisper. "Are you here to visit someone?" she asked, turning back to her knitting. The ball of blue yarn moved gently in her lap as her fingers, now thinner and with more visible veins, worked with the same precision he remembered. Mark felt his throat tighten. "Yes, I am." She smiled politely again. "I hope your visit goes well." A heavy silence settled between them. Margaret Ellis, his mother, went back to her knitting, oblivious to the emotional earthquake happening inside the man before her. To her, he was just another stranger in the garden. "Excuse me, sir." A young nurse appeared. "Mrs. Ellis needs to take her medications now." "Is it time already?" Margaret asked, looking slightly confused. "How quickly time passes when we're busy." The nurse helped her stand, tucking the knitting into a cloth bag. Margaret offered Mark one last polite smile before walking back to the building, leaning on the nurse's arm. Mark stood there, feeling weak in the knees. A few feet away, colorful flowers swayed in the gentle breeze, and somewhere a bird was singing. Life went on around him, but inside, something had just shattered irrevocably. "Mr. Collins," Gloria Winters's voice sounded distant. "Are you all right? You look pale." Mark turned, trying to regain the professional composure he always kept. But the mask of the successful executive had cracks in it now, and through them seeped a pain he didn't know he still possessed. "I'm sorry." He cleared his throat, avoiding the director's gaze. "I just remembered something urgent. Can we make this quick?" As he handed over the check and posed for routine photos, Mark struggled to process the impossible. His mother, who was supposed to be in her house thousands of miles away, lived in a nursing home in the city where he had resided for the past 5 years. And another son, surely Ryan, his younger brother, visited her every week. 15 minutes later, Mark was speeding down the highway, his tie pulled loose and his breathing uneven. On the passenger seat, the Green Meadows brochure casually displayed Margaret Ellis's face, smiling in a group photo. His mother had not recognized him. Worse yet, he hadn't even known she was there. The world Mark had so carefully built for years, the world where his absence was justified, where his success compensated for everything, collapsed with a single, vacant look. Mark hardly remembered driving back home. The route he had taken every day for 5 years felt unfamiliar now, as though he were navigating unknown streets. When he finally parked in the garage of his luxury condo, he sat in the car for long minutes, staring into space. His phone vibrated repeatedly. Messages from Janet, his assistant. Meeting started 20 minutes ago. Everyone's waiting. Then, "Are you okay? Should I reschedule?" And finally, rescheduled for tomorrow. "Call me when you can." Mark turned off his phone. For the first time in 15 years, an important meeting seemed utterly irrelevant. The apartment on the 18th floor was typical of a successful, single executive. Minimalist decor, state-of-the-art equipment, and a panoramic view of the city. Mark had always been proud of that place, a concrete proof that he had arrived where he wanted to be. Now every corner seemed to shout the emptiness of his personal life. He took off his suit jacket, tossed it onto the Italian leather sofa, and went straight to the bar. He poured himself a whiskey just an inch, without ice. The amber liquid burned his throat, but did nothing to ease the weight on his chest. He sank into the armchair facing the window, the city stretched out below, indifferent to his personal drama. How many stories like his played out daily in those buildings? How many families torn apart by choices that once made sense? "Mom," he whispered, testing out a word he hadn't said aloud in so long. The last time they had spoken was by phone, 7 years ago. A brief, practical conversation. He was busy, had just closed a big deal. She talked about small things, everyday life, the garden, a new recipe, a neighbor who had moved away. He listened with half his attention, offering one-word replies while checking his emails. "When will you visit us, son?" she asked at the end. "Soon, Mom. As soon as things calm down here." Things never did calm down. Mark took another sip and closed his eyes. The memories he had forced to the back of his mind began to surface. Disobedient. His childhood wasn't bad. A modest house in the suburbs, a backyard, a dog named Buck, and windows that let in enough light to warm the living room floor on winter afternoons. His mother, Margaret, was an elementary teacher who always came home with books and stories. His father, Thomas, worked at the local factory and came home tired but never failed to play ball with the kids before dinner. And Ryan, 4 years younger, followed Mark everywhere like a faithful shadow. They weren't wealthy, but they had enough. Enough food, enough space, enough love. So what changed? Mark got up, restless, and walked to a built-in shelf. In the back of the third drawer, inside a folder, was the only personal item he'd held onto when he moved into that apartment, an envelope with some old photos. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, spreading the photographs around him. Frozen snapshots of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Birthdays, graduations, a Christmas, a picnic in the park. One photo showed him at 17, holding a debate trophy, the confident smile, the ambitious look, the beginning of the end, perhaps. It was after that state-level debate competition that everything began to change. The school counselor called him in to discuss colleges. "You have the potential for so much more than this town can offer," the man said. Those words fell like seeds on fertile ground. Mark had always been a good student, but from that day on, he became obsessed. He studied all night, applied for every scholarship, joined prestigious summer programs at renowned universities. He started seeing his home, his family, his town as anchors, holding him back from the brilliant future he deserved. The night he told his parents he'd been accepted to Princeton on a full scholarship should have been celebratory. In a way, it was. His mother baked a cake. His father opened the only bottle of champagne he was saving for special occasions. But there was something in their eyes, pride, yes, but also a bittersweet sadness. "We're so proud," his father said in a raspy voice. "You're going farther than any of us." It should have been a compliment, but Mark took it as confirmation he was different, destined for bigger things. The summer before college felt strange. He was already mentally checked out, as if he'd already left. His childhood friends seemed childish now, their concerns too small. Ryan, 13 at the time, tried to spend every minute with his older brother, sensing that something was changing forever. Mark picked up a photo of the two of them side by side in front of the house. Ryan was all smiles, hair messy, knee scraped. Mark looked more reserved, as though he belonged somewhere else. In college, phone calls home became fewer. During breaks, he stayed only as long as necessary, always with excuses about internships, projects, or unmissable opportunities. Every visit made him feel like he was regressing, and he had to hurry back to the world he was building. His father's death, a sudden heart attack during Mark's sophomore year, was the first major blow. He returned for the funeral, stayed 3 days, then left again. "I have a crucial project to finish," he told his mother. What he didn't say was that the house, now empty of his father, felt suffocating, weighed down by accusing silence. The following years were a blur of achievements: an MBA at Harvard, his first job at a prestigious consulting firm, rapid promotions, founding his own company at 30. Each rung he climbed pulled him further from his family. Until one day, without noticing exactly when, distance became detachment, and detachment became absence. The last time he saw his mother and brother in person was one Christmas 9 years ago. A tense visit full of superficial topics and awkward silences. He brought expensive gifts, as though the price tag could make up for his absence. He left early, claiming a work emergency. In the ensuing years, the estrangement solidified. Calls to his mother became increasingly spaced and mechanical. His bank transfers grew more generous, as if he could buy the right to be absent. Then, nothing. No news that she had moved. No information about her health. No invitation to visit her at the nursing home. Why? Mark put the photos away and returned to the armchair, refilling his glass. He tried to rationalize, as he always did with business problems. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe it was better not to barge back into her life now after all this time. But something inside him, something long dormant, began to stir. A voice he had silenced for years now whispered inconvenient truths. They hadn't been the ones to pull away. He had left. The wall clock showed it was almost midnight by the time Mark finally rose from the chair. Tomorrow he would have to face the corporate world again, smile in meetings, make big decisions. But tonight, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the weight of all the absences he had created. Before going to bed, he looked at his phone. It showed dozens of unread emails, messages from clients, and reminders. He ignored them all and opened his browser. He typed, Green Meadows Living Center, Alzheimer's. The results confirmed his suspicions. His mother wasn't just an elderly lady in a nursing home. She was losing her memories, including the ones of him. The house was only 20 minutes from downtown. Mark had to check his GPS 3 times to find his way through the quiet suburbs. The neighborhood was modest, with neatly kept lawns and middle-class cars parked in driveways. Nothing like his exclusive condo. When he finally found house number 47, Mark parked across the street and watched it for a few minutes. It was a simple 2-story structure, with some peeling blue paint on the edges and a small front porch, the kind of home he'd once considered too ordinary for his dreams. There were colorful children's toys scattered in the yard, a family then. His brother had taken the conventional path Mark had always avoided. Taking a deep breath, he got out of the car. He hadn't set up a time or announced he was coming. After the shock at the nursing home, he had spent the morning cancelling commitments, calling Green Meadows to confirm his mother had indeed been there for 2 years, and searching for Ryan's address. Each step along the sidewalk leading to the door felt like an enormous effort. What would he say? How would he explain showing up after all this time? Their last conversation hadn't been friendly. Ringing the doorbell, Mark felt a wave of nausea. He nearly turned around, but his feet stayed planted on the porch. The door opened, and a boy of about 6 appeared, staring curiously at him. "Who are you?" Mark hesitated. "Uncle." He barely knew this nephew. "I'm looking for Ryan Ellis. Is he here?" The boy turned his head inside. "Dad, there's a man in a suit here." Ryan appeared seconds later, holding a towel. He looked like he'd just stepped out of the shower, hair still damp. When he saw Mark, his face instantly hardened. The resemblance between the brothers was undeniable, despite obvious differences. Mark in his impeccable suit, Ryan in worn jeans and a t-shirt. "Charlie, go play in the backyard," Ryan told his son in a voice that allowed no argument. The boy looked at both men, sensing the tension, but obeyed. "How did you find me?" Ryan's voice was icy. "Wasn't hard." "Sure, for someone with money, nothing is hard." A heavy silence settled between them. Ryan made no move to invite him in, remaining a barrier in the doorway. "May I?" Mark swallowed. "May we talk?" Ryan stepped aside without a word, more a gesture of resignation than an invitation. The living room was simple and cozy, a couch with a few stains, a coffee table covered in children's books, family photos on the walls. A real life, unfiltered. "This'll have to be quick. I have to pick Ellie up from school in 40 minutes, Ryan said, indicating a chair for Mark while he remained standing, as if unwilling to make the meeting more comfortable by sitting. Mark perched on the edge of the chair, uneasy. Where to begin? "I saw Mom yesterday." Ryan kept his face impassive, his eyes cold and fixed on his brother. "At Green Meadows," Mark continued. "I had no idea she was there, didn't even know you'd moved here." "Why would you know? Did you call once in the past 5 years?" The question hit Mark like a slap. He'd sent Christmas cards and the occasional short email. But calls, he couldn't remember. "I've been busy with—" "I don't care." Ryan cut him off, voice sharp as a razor. "If you came here to ease your conscience, you're wasting your time." Mark took a deep breath. He hadn't come to fight. What happened to her? Alzheimer's? Ryan didn't answer right away. His gaze was distant, as though deciding if Mark deserved the information. "It started about 4 years ago," he finally said clinically. "Little forgetfulness at first, then it got worse. Once it became dangerous for her to live alone, it was clear she needed professional care." There was no emotion in his tone, just dry facts, as if speaking to a stranger. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ryan's glance was so cold that Mark nearly stepped back physically. "Why do you care now?" You weren't here. He pointed to the floor, emphasizing every word. While Mom was losing pieces of herself every day, where were you? Closing deals, flying first class. You forgot her long before she started forgetting you. The words hit Mark like a punch. The unvarnished truth with no sugarcoating. I sent money, he offered weakly, even to his own ears. Money? Ryan's voice dripped with scorn. Of course you'd bring that up, as if you can buy the right to be called a son. He crossed his arms, forming yet another barrier between them. You know what your money didn't buy? Time. Time she lost without you. Mark felt a lump in his throat. He stood and walked to a shelf lined with family photos. He recognized Ryan with a dark-haired woman, likely his wife, 2 smiling kids, Charlie and a girl who must be Ellie. In a smaller frame, there was a newer photo of their mother, sitting on a garden bench, probably at the nursing home. Ryan watched his every move like someone guarding against an intruder. Mark paused, not sure what to say. Look, Ryan continued without softening his tone. I did what I thought was right. I'm not rich like you. I placed her there, but I didn't abandon her. I visit her every week. They told me, good for you. In a day, you discovered what I've lived with for years. Mark tried to form words, but everything felt inadequate in the face of Ryan's hostility. She's disappearing, Mark, Ryan said at last, showing a flicker of emotion, but it was restrained. Each week worse than the last. But that probably means nothing to you, right? Just another problem your money can solve from a distance. Mark looked away, unable to meet his brother's accusing stare. For the first time, he had no defense. No brilliant counter-argument, no rationalization for his choices. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of Charlie playing outside and the ticking of a wall clock. What do you want, Mark? Ryan finally asked, glancing at his watch as though counting down the minutes until he could be rid of him. Why are you here today? It was a good question. Why had he come? What did he hope to achieve with this confrontation? I don't know. The answer came out more honestly than he intended. I saw her yesterday and she didn't recognize me. It was as if I'd never existed for her. Ryan's expression remained unsympathetic, his face impassive. That's what happens when you simply stop existing in someone's life for years. He grabbed the car keys, signaling the conversation was over. But this isn't about you, Mark. It never was. Mark nodded, finally grasping the magnitude of his mistake. He had lived as though the world revolved around him, his goals, his success, as though his personal sacrifices were admirable rather than selfish choices. Can I visit her again? He asked, almost whispering. Ryan studied him for a moment before replying, his gaze devoid of warmth. It's not up to me. She's there. The nursing home has open visiting hours. He opened the door, indicating the end of the conversation. Just don't expect recognition or gratitude. It's too late for that. Mark walked to the door, feeling strangely light and crushingly heavy all at once. In the yard, Charlie looked up and waved, an innocent gesture that contrasted sharply with the tension between the adults. I saw in the records that you pay for the nursing home, he said before he could stop himself. It's your money that pays. I just signed the papers, Ryan replied flatly. That's what it's for, right? To keep your conscience clean from a distance. Another blow. Mark tried to recall the last time he'd even checked where his automatic transfers went. Probably years ago. Thank you for taking care of her, he finally said. Ryan didn't reply, just stared at him with hard eyes. When Mark was halfway across the porch, he heard his brother's voice behind him. She still likes daisies and old jazz. The information was delivered as a fact, not a friendly suggestion. Not that it matters now. Mark nodded and walked back to his car, feeling the weight of his brother's gaze until he closed the door and started the engine. Ryan's message was clear. You can visit her, but this changes nothing between us. Mark barely remembered how he drove back to his apartment. The path from Ryan's suburb to the city center seemed to vanish from his mind, as though he'd jumped from one place to the next without the minutes in between. When he entered the elevator in his building, the doorman greeted him with the usual respect, but Mark barely acknowledged it. The elevator's digital display rose floor by floor until it reached 18. The soft chime announced his arrival, and the doors slid open onto the silent corridor, with its plush carpet absorbing his footsteps. His apartment was exactly as he'd left it that morning, immaculate, stylish, empty. Mark tossed his keys on the coffee table and loosened his tie. For years, this end-of-day ritual had signified freedom, the pleasure of returning to his private sanctuary after hours of deals and decisions. Tonight, each motion felt mechanical, devoid of meaning. He went to his wine fridge and selected a bottle of red, a prize-winning Cabernet that cost more than his father used to earn in an entire month at the factory. He poured a generous amount into a glass and carried it to the sofa positioned in front of the panoramic window. Outside, the city was beginning to light up as the sun set. Office buildings with lit windows, avenues lined with cars, and farther out, tiny dots of light marking residential neighborhoods. Somewhere out there, Ryan was likely having dinner with his family. Elsewhere, his mother might be gazing out the nursing home window, not recognizing the city she now lived in. Mark took a sip of the wine. The flavor he usually savored tasted bitter on his tongue. Between the concrete and glass, between the reflections of city lights on the window and his own indistinct reflection, Mark finally let himself remember. Not the curated memories he kept for his success narrative, but the things he'd chosen to forget, so he could move on without guilt. He remembered the day he left for college, the car loaded with his belongings, his mother on the porch with tear-filled eyes but a proud smile. "You'll conquer the world," she said. And he replied, with all the arrogance of an 18-year-old, "That's exactly what I intend to do." He had to succeed. That had been his mantra, his rationale for every choice. For the missed Christmases, forgotten birthdays, unreturned calls. He recalled graduation day chaos when his parents and Ryan drove 12 hours to see him receive his diploma. He was so busy impressing professors and future employers that he spent only 2 hours with them before rushing off to a party with his classmates. "You understand, right? These connections are important for my career." Then came the first job, the first apartment in the big city, the first substantial bonus. Each accomplishment was followed by a short call home. "I can't make it this Christmas. I'm on an important project." "Sorry about your birthday, Mom, but I'm at a crucial conference." "Not this weekend, Ryan. I'm closing a deal." Each step up the corporate ladder pulled him further from his mother's laughter at Sunday dinners, from late-night chats on the porch with his father, from phone calls with his brother about small-town news. His father's death should have been a wake-up call, a reminder of time's fragility. Instead, Mark converted that pain into more fuel for his ambition. He worked harder, slept less, immersed himself in projects as though every professional triumph could compensate for his personal losses. "Mom's worried about you," Ryan said once during a rare call after the funeral. "You need to take care of yourself too." "I'm taking care of our future," Mark replied. "Someone has to ensure she's financially secure." It never occurred to him that security also meant being present, that comfort involved more than the number of zeros in a bank account. A tear rolled down Mark's face, then another and another. He hadn't cried since his father's funeral almost 20 years ago. Emotion felt strange in his body, as if he'd forgotten how to speak its language. He cried for the absence he himself created, for the empty spaces in the family photos of recent years, for the time that would never return. He cried for the loneliness that had become routine, for the coldness he had nurtured as a professional virtue until it seeped into his personal life. He cried for the love he had set aside, believing there would always be time to recover it later. The tears fell silently, without sobs or wailing, just a steady flow, as though an internal dam had finally found a small crack to release years of bottled-up emotion. He refilled his glass and stared out at the city again. His life was out there, the office in one of those mirrored buildings, the fine restaurants where he sealed deals, the art galleries where he occasionally bought pieces as investments. Every facet of his existence meticulously constructed to project success and power. But now, sitting alone in his stylish apartment, Mark faced a painful truth. After achieving everything he thought he wanted, he might have lost what truly mattered. What good was owning a wine cellar full of rare vintages if there was nobody to share them with? What was the point of an Italian designer sofa if he never had guests? Why have 3 guest suites that had remained unused for years? He got up and wandered through his apartment, suddenly seeing it with fresh eyes. Nothing in it told his story. There were no personal photos, no family souvenirs from trips, no handmade gifts. It looked like something out of a design magazine. Perfect, admirable, and utterly soulless. On the living room wall hung just one painting, an abstract piece the decorator chose, explaining how it matched the sofa's color and would appreciate in value over time. Mark had never really looked at it. Now he noticed it was a canvas of cool hues with shapes that meant nothing. Guilt seized him, followed by remorse, not just over his ailing mother or his abandoned brother, but also for himself, for the life not lived, for the lost connections, for the humanity he had smothered in pursuit of success. And with those emotions came a painful but necessary awareness. It was not just too late for his mother to recognize him, it was too late for many things. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for everything. Mark wiped his face and glanced once more at the city lights. Somewhere in that sea of illumination, a white-haired lady might be looking at the same sky, unaware she had a son named Mark. A son who, after all these years chasing the future, was finally looking back to see what it had cost him. The next morning, Mark woke to his alarm feeling as though something fundamental inside him had shifted. He rubbed his face, eyes still puffy from the previous night's tears. For the first time in years, he cancelled all his appointments without any elaborate excuse. Janet, his assistant, sounded confused on the phone but didn't question him. "Take the day off, Mr. Collins. The corporate world will survive without you for 24 hours. Her words, though kind, carried a truth Mark was only now beginning to grasp. The world would keep turning even without his constant presence. Companies would go on functioning, markets would fluctuate, contracts would be signed. No one was irreplaceable in that universe. But for Margaret Ellis, it had been different. When he left her life and no one filled the void of her eldest son. And now, as her memory slipped away, that space might be closing forever. Mark dressed without hurry. Instead of his usual suit, he opted for slacks and a cashmere sweater, formal enough to preserve his dignity, but softer than his daily executive armor. On the way to Green Meadows, he stopped at a florist. "Something special today, sir?" asked the clerk. "Daisies," he answered, recalling Ryan's cold words. "A big bouquet, please." The woman smiled as she prepared the arrangement. "Must be for someone special, I'm guessing." Mark nodded without elaborating. How could he explain he was buying flowers for someone who wouldn't know who he was, for his own mother, who now saw him as a stranger? He felt a peculiar nervousness as he arrived at the nursing home, an anxiety he hadn't experienced in years, maybe not since the early days of his career. Odd that he felt it now on the threshold of meeting his mother. Susan, the receptionist, recognized him immediately. "Mr. Collins, we weren't expecting you back so soon. Are you visiting someone specific today?" Mark realized she didn't know his connection to Margaret. To the staff, he was just the businessman who donated money. "Yes," he replied simply, "Margaret Ellis." Susan's face softened. "How kind of you, Mrs. Ellis doesn't get many visitors besides her son." "The other son," she corrected herself, likely noticing some shift in Mark's expression. "She's probably in the garden now. She likes to spend her mornings there." Mark thanked her and walked down the corridor that led to the courtyard. Each step felt heavier than the last. What would he say? How should he behave? Would he just be another friendly stranger to her? Or would there be some flicker of recognition, even if unconscious? He found her in the same spot as the previous day, under the apple tree, but this time she wasn't knitting. She was simply sitting there, watching the birds hop around the grass in search of scraps. Mark approached quietly, as though afraid to startle a wild animal. When he was just a few feet away, she lifted her gaze. Those eyes, the same ones he'd inherited, showed no sign of familiarity. "Good morning," he said, offering a gentle smile. "Good morning," she replied politely but distantly. "I brought you some flowers, daisies." He held out the bouquet. "I thought they might brighten your day." Margaret looked at the flowers in genuine surprise, then at Mark, confused. "For me? But do I know you?" The question hurt more than Mark expected, even though he'd seen it coming. "Not exactly," he said, deciding not to force the situation. "I was here yesterday." We spoke briefly. She seemed to accept his explanation, though she still looked puzzled. She took the flowers gently, her thin fingers brushing over the white petals. "They're very pretty. I've always liked daisies. They remind me of—" Her voice trailed off, as if the memory she was trying to reach had slipped into an inaccessible corner of her mind. "Of what?" Mark asked softly, taking a seat on the bench beside her. Margaret shook her head in frustration. "I can't remember. That happens a lot lately. I start a sentence and forget what I was going to say." "Don't worry," Mark reassured her. "It happens to everyone." She smiled, grateful for his kindness. "Are you new here?" "I've never seen you before." "No, I'm not a resident, just a visitor." "Oh, you came to see a relative." Mark hesitated for a moment. "Yes," he finally replied. "Someone very important to me." In the days that followed, Mark established a routine. He drastically rearranged his schedule, delegating responsibilities, postponing non-essential meetings, working remotely when needed. Janet seemed torn between worry and relief, worried by her boss's sudden change, relieved to see him finally seeking some balance. Every morning, Mark visited Green Meadows. Sometimes he stayed only an hour. Other times, he spent the whole day. He always brought something: fresh flowers, an interesting book, a magazine, or sweets. Small offerings that required no explanation, only moments of quiet joy. Margaret never recognized him. Each morning was a new beginning, a fresh introduction. "Hello, I'm Mark," he would say, and she would inevitably respond, "Nice to meet you, Mark. Do you come here often?" Initially, the daily repetition felt like a stab to the heart. Over time, Mark learned to accept it. He began to see each new day as a blank page, another chance to be there, even if only as a kind stranger. One rainy Tuesday, unable to go out to the garden, Mark found Margaret in the activity room, gazing out the window with a lost expression. "Good morning," he said, approaching with a small package in his hands. "I brought something sweet to brighten the day." She turned, examining him with that polite, empty look. "Good morning. You are—" "Mark. We met yesterday." "Oh, right. Sorry. My memory isn't very good." "Don't worry about that." Mark opened the package, revealing slices of cake. "I thought we could have some coffee together. It's corn cake with a honey glaze." Her eyes lit up in a way he hadn't seen before. For a moment, just a brief moment, Mark thought he saw a deeper spark, some distant memory stirring in her mind. "Corn cake," she repeated, almost in a whisper. "I used to make that for—" Again, her sentence trailed off, the memory receding out of reach. But as Margaret tasted the cake, she closed her eyes and smiled. "It's delicious. I really like corn cake. The flavor reminds me of something nice." Mark felt a warm sensation spread through his chest. It wasn't intellectual recognition. She didn't know who he was. It was something more basic, more primal. A sensory memory without a name but full of meaning. "I'm glad you like it," he said simply. That afternoon, he read passages from The Little Prince to her, a book she had read to him as a child. She listened attentively, occasionally commenting on the illustrations, sometimes closing her eyes to absorb the words. She never showed any sign of recalling the story or connecting it to her past. Even so, Mark kept reading. On another visit, he brought a small vintage music box he found at a thrift store. The melody was a lullaby she used to sing to him. Margaret held the object curiously, and when it started playing, her fingers instinctively tapped along to the familiar tune. "This song," she said, her forehead wrinkling in concentration. "It's pretty, isn't it?" Mark said, not pressing further. "Yes, very pretty. Feels like I've heard it before." Days turned into weeks. Mark became a familiar presence at the nursing home, recognized by the staff and other residents. Some noticed his resemblance to Margaret, but he never explicitly confirmed he was her son. Somehow, it seemed easier that way. One particularly observant nurse, Elena, finally commented while adjusting Margaret's pillows during one of Mark's visits, "You two have the same eyes. she said softly to Mark as Margaret gazed out the window. Mark nodded without replying. She used to be a teacher, you know, elementary school. The kids adored her. I know, Mark answered, eyes fixed on his mother. Elena seemed to understand there was more to the story than met the eye, but she asked no further questions. She simply patted Mark's shoulder gently and left mother and son alone. Mark learned new ways to care and connect. He discovered that Margaret calmed down when he gently ran his hand over her white hair, just as she used to do for him during childhood thunderstorms. He noticed that she lit up at old songs, even if she didn't recognize the titles. He observed how she enjoyed listening to stories about distant places, even if she wouldn't remember any details the next day. On a particularly quiet Sunday, Mark arrived earlier than usual and found Margaret still groggy, with a caregiver helping her fix her hair. "Mr. Collins, glad you're early," the young woman said. "Mrs. Ellis woke up a bit restless today. Maybe your presence will calm her." Mark entered the room seeing his mother's personal space for the first time. It was a simple yet welcoming room. The pastel walls displayed a few photos. He recognized Ryan with his kids, the old family home, and one of his father, Thomas. There were none of Mark. "Good morning," he said, approaching cautiously. Margaret looked at him, her eyes still cloudy from sleep or confusion. "Good morning. Who are you?" "Mark? I'm your friend, remember?" She shook her head, appearing more lost than usual. The caregiver gave Mark a worried glance. "Bad days happen," she whispered. "She's more confused than normal today. Could be the weather. Season changes affect some patients." Mark nodded, feeling a pang of sadness but determined not to give up. "May I?" he asked, taking the hairbrush from the caregiver. The young woman looked surprised but handed it over. "Sure, I'll let you have some time alone. Call me if you need anything." Left alone, Mark sat on the edge of the bed and began to brush Margaret's hair gently. The simple act, so intimate yet so basic, seemed to transcend the barrier of her lost memory. "My hair is so thin now," she remarked, looking more present. "When I was young, it was thicker and dark, very dark." "I know," Mark replied. "It's still beautiful." His hands worked delicately, smoothing out the white strands. The brush glided softly, as though restoring not just her hair but also fragments of dignity that the illness threatened to steal away. "You're very good at this," Margaret said, visibly relaxing. "Have you had practice?" "I learned from the best," he said, voice slightly husky. In that moment, as he cared for the woman who once cared for him, Mark realized he was building something new. Not recovering what was lost. No one could fight the relentless nature of the disease, but forging a different kind of connection based not on recognition or shared memories, but on presence, on care, on the here and now. Margaret might not know who he was. She might not recall the years of his childhood, the bedtime stories, the birthday parties, or the advice she gave him before he left for college. But she could feel the kindness in his gestures, the tenderness in his actions, the gentleness in his voice. And maybe, Mark thought, as he helped her stand for breakfast, that was enough for now. Starting from scratch, winning small moments of connection, building bridges over the abyss of lost memories. It wasn't what he'd imagined when he stepped into the nursing home that first day. It wasn't the emotional reunion he'd secretly hoped for. It was harder, more painful, and strangely purer. It was love without recognition, devotion without memory, care without expecting anything in return. And little by little, day by day, Mark began to see he was learning a lesson that had arrived late but was still on time. Sometimes the truest love is not about receiving. It's about simply giving, unconditionally, without guarantees or certainty. Just presence, just care, just love. The first text message Mark sent to Ryan came after a week of daily visits to Green Meadows. A simple note, no elaboration. "I'm visiting Mom every day." He didn't expect a reply. He was surprised when, 3 hours later, his phone buzzed with a notification. "Why?" Ryan's question was blunt and carried all the pent-up doubt and resentment from years of absence. Mark stared at the screen for a long time before responding. The honest reply would have been, "I don't know," or "because I need to, Ikaw," but neither felt like enough. Because I've already lost too much time, he finally typed. Digital silence followed for 2 days. Mark continued his visits, assuming their brief exchange was all he could hope for. On the third night, another message arrived. Did she eat well today? Sometimes she refuses dinner. It was a simple, practical question. There was no implied forgiveness or emotional closeness, just a concern for Margaret's well-being, something they now shared. For Mark, it was a start. Yes, she had some soup and a little pudding. Nurse Elena said it was a good day. The reply came faster this time. Elena's good. She pays attention to details. Thus began a strange form of communication between the brothers, short messages, almost clinical, about Margaret's condition, what she ate, how she slept, whether she joined the home's activities. Rarely did they talk about themselves or the past. It was as though they had formed a silent pact. They could coexist within this small space of shared concern, so long as they avoided the landmine of personal issues. Their exchanges became more frequent over the weeks. Mark sent daily updates after his visits, and Ryan would respond, sometimes with questions, sometimes with bits of information to help Mark better understand their mother's condition. She confused my name today, called me Robert. That's our uncle, Dad's younger brother. She does that sometimes, mixes generations. Or tried reading to her, but she seemed agitated. Try in the morning. Afternoons are worse. Sundowning, the doctors said. It wasn't exactly a reconciliation, more like a practical truce formed around Margaret's fragile existence. Ryan maintained his cold distance, and Mark didn't force closeness. He knew he had no right to. One rainy Tuesday, after nearly a month of these minimal exchanges, Ryan sent a different kind of message. Charlie asked about you today. Mark stared at his phone, surprised. Charlie, his nephew, the boy he barely knew. What did he ask? He asked if the man in a suit was really my brother. Said we didn't seem like brothers because we didn't hug when we met. Mark gave a sad smile at the screen. Children always see the truth plainly. Kids notice everything, he replied. Yeah. He also asked why you never come for dinner like his other uncles. I didn't know what to say. It was an opening, a small one, but real. Mark took a deep breath before typing, What do you think about me answering in person? Maybe dinner? The silence that followed was the longest since they'd begun talking again, so long that Mark assumed he'd pushed too far. He was about to message and retract the offer when Ryan's reply appeared. Sunday, 6 p.m. Sarah's making lasagna. It wasn't enthusiastic, but it was a yes. Mark felt a surge of relief mixed with anxiety, 5 words opening a door he thought was locked forever. I'll be there. Thank you. In the days leading up to Sunday, Mark continued visiting Green Meadows again, but with renewed energy. He told Margaret about the invitation, even though she didn't fully understand or wouldn't remember minutes later. I'm having dinner with Ryan on Sunday, he'd say, helping her with a simple jigsaw puzzle for occupational therapy. With his family, my nephew Charlie and little Ellie. Margaret smiled vaguely, focusing on a blue puzzle piece. Family is important, she replied. A phrase Mark had noticed was part of her limited repertoire, one small truth that remained even as other memories vanished. Yes, it is, he agreed, feeling the weight of that simple statement. I was slow to learn that. On Friday, 2 days before dinner, Mark decided to do some organizing in his apartment. It wasn't really necessary. His cleaning service came twice a week, but he felt a need to keep busy, to use his hands while his mind processed all the recent changes. He started in the closet, rearranging suits he no longer wore as often since he'd adjusted his schedule to spend more time at the nursing home. In the back were some boxes he hadn't opened in years. Old documents, college memorabilia, bits of his past packed away neatly when he moved in. One smaller box had no label. Mark opened it curiously. Wrapped in layers of tissue paper were a few childhood items. A small 4th grade spelling bee trophy, a watch given by his father on his 10th birthday, a book with a dedication from his mother, and a framed photo. Mark carefully lifted the photo. The wooden frame was scratched in one corner, and the glass had a small crack, but the picture itself was intact. It showed him, Ryan and Margaret at a picnic in a local park. Mark must have been around 16, which would make Ryan about 12. The memory of that day resurfaced vividly, unexpectedly. It was a spring Sunday. His father was working an extra shift at the factory, as he often did to supplement their income on weekends. Margaret had decided to take the boys to the park, taking advantage of the perfect weather. She'd prepared a full picnic basket, homemade pâté sandwiches, sliced fruit, lemonade in a thermos, and of course, her famous corn cake with honey glaze. They spread a red and white checkered cloth on the grass, partly under the shade of an oak tree. Ryan, always full of energy, spent the morning running around, tossing a frisbee with other kids, climbing trees, and only returning to the blanket to eat, and how he ate. Mark remembered watching him devour 3 pieces of cake in a row, to his mother's concern. "You'll get a stomachache, Ryan," Margaret warned, though her tone was more amused than reprimanding. "Worth it?" the boy replied, mouth still full of cake. Mark, on the other hand, pretended disinterest in the family outing. He'd brought a book, acting engrossed in reading, occasionally casting bored glances at his younger brother's antics. That was the role he'd assumed in recent years. The overly serious teens, too mature for childish stuff. But the truth, which he'd never admitted to anyone, was that he felt deeply safe in those moments. His mother's calm presence, his brother's enthusiasm, the simplicity of the day. It created a bubble of belonging he valued, even if he never showed it. Margaret laughed easily that day. He remembered her clear laughter when Ryan tried balancing an orange on his head, or when a particularly daring squirrel came too close to the food basket. Her laugh always began in her eyes before reaching her lips, an almost luminous quality he'd forgotten. The photo was taken by a passing stranger, Margaret asked, wanting to capture the moment. In the picture, she's in the middle, one arm around each son. Ryan grins widely, face smeared with chocolate, while Mark maintains a studied indifference, but his eyes, he could see it now, revealed happiness despite the mask. Mark studied the photo for a long time, running his fingers over the dusty surface. That family in the picture seemed to belong to another life, another Mark, another time. Yet here they were, preserved on photo paper, him, his brother, his mother, connected, whole. Carefully, he removed the picture from the old frame. The broken glass fell out, nearly cutting his fingers. He placed the photo on the table, checking the damage. A few yellowish stains on the edges. A small crease in the upper corner, but nothing that couldn't be restored. The next day, he took it to a specialty shop. The elderly clerk, glasses perched on the end of his nose, studied it carefully. "We can restore the colors, remove these spots," he said, pointing to the damaged areas. "It'll be almost like new." "Almost?" Mark asked. The man smiled. "Well, photographs are like memories, you know. They always lose something in the process of repair. But we preserve what matters." Mark nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind those simple words. "Do your best. I'd like a new frame, too. Something simple but good quality." 3 days later, Mark picked up the restored photo. The colors were more vibrant, the stains gone, protected by non-reflective glass in a dark wood frame, elegant without being ostentatious. That afternoon, he brought the photo to Green Meadows. He found Margaret in the piano room, where a volunteer was playing for a small group of residents. His mother sat near the window, her gaze distant, hands folded on her lap. "Hello," Mark said, approaching carefully so as not to startle her. She turned to him, eyes taking a moment to focus. "Hello," she replied politely with no recognition. "I brought you something," he continued, pulling a wrapped package from his bag. A photograph. Mark handed her the neatly wrapped frame. She opened it slowly, precisely, as though unwrapping something very fragile. When the photo was revealed, Margaret examined it curiously. Her fingers traced the outlines of the faces in that distant moment in time. There was no recognition in her eyes, no sudden spark, no aha moment, just a gentle interest, the same she might show for any pleasant image. "They're nice people," she commented. "Yes," Mark agreed, swallowing hard. "A day at the park, a picnic. Looks like a happy day," she said, still studying the photo. The woman has a lovely smile. She does. And the boys? She paused, brow furrowing slightly, as though trying to reach a memory beyond her grasp. Brothers? Yes, Mark confirmed. They're brothers. Margaret nodded, satisfied to have confirmed something she somehow sensed, without knowing how. She kept holding the photo gently, as if she felt its value even without grasping its significance. May I put it in your room? Mark asked. So you can look at it every day. Yes, that would be nice, she replied, handing the photo back. It's a beautiful image. It feels peaceful. Mark felt a lump in his throat. She didn't know she was looking at herself, her own sons, a memory that belonged as much to her as it did to him. And yet, something in that picture still reached her, still resonated in a place the disease hadn't touched. That evening, he texted Ryan, I took an old photo to her today, the one from the Riverside Park picnic, remember? All three of us on the red and white blanket. The reply came quickly, surprising Mark. I remember, I ate so much cake I got a stomachache. Did she recognize it? No, but she said it felt peaceful. Part of her is still there, Ryan. Somehow. Several minutes passed before Ryan's next message. Sometimes I feel like I'm visiting a ghost. A shell of our mommet without her inside. It was the most personal, most vulnerable statement Ryan had shared. Mark read those words, feeling the weight of his brother's pain, a pain Mark was only just beginning to comprehend. I know. It's like hugging a shadow. But there are moments. Fragments. What kind of fragments? Mark hesitated before typing. Earlier, in the common room, they started playing jazz on the piano. She hummed along, as though she recognized the tune. She laughed when she realized she was doing it. He remembered the moment vividly. After placing the photo in Margaret's room, they had returned to the lounge area where a volunteer began playing jazz standards on the piano. When the first notes of Fly Me to the Moon sounded, something awakened in Margaret's face. Her fingers began tapping lightly on her lap, following the rhythm. Then, to Mark's surprise, she started humming, matching the melody with surprising accuracy. There were no lyrics, just the soft sound of her voice accompanying the tune. At one point, Margaret realized she was humming. She looked at Mark with a slightly shy expression, then smiled and let out a small laugh, the most genuine, alive sound he had heard from her since their reunion. For an instant, just a brief instant, it seemed the real Margaret had emerged from the fog of her disease. Music remains, Ryan replied after a long pause. The neurologist said it's one of the last things to go. It was beautiful, wrote Mark, and painful at the same time. Welcome to my life for the past 2 years, came Ryan's blunt reply. Mark knew he deserved that. Ryan's resentment was justified. While Mark was building his career and piling up professional accomplishments, Ryan had been facing their mother's decline alone, watching her lose a little more of herself each day. I'm sorry, he replied simply. It's not about you being sorry, Mark, Ryan shot back almost immediately. It never was. The message stung, but Mark knew it was true. His regret, his guilt, his late attempts at reparation, none of it was really about Margaret or Ryan. It was about him, about his own redemption. After a few minutes, another message from Ryan arrived. Sunday, don't be late and bring wine. Mark smiled at his phone. It was the first time Ryan had added a personal request to the dinner invitation. Not exactly an olive branch, but maybe a small twig. I'll be there, with wine, he wrote back. Over the following days, Mark balanced his reduced work schedule with his visits to Green Meadows. After each visit, he noticed that Margaret would look at the photo he'd brought. Sometimes she asked who the people were, other times she just noted how happy it seemed. One afternoon, she surprised Mark by saying, while staring at the picture, "You know, I used to go on picnics with my kids." Mark's heart pounded. Really? Yes, she continued, eyes still on the image. I don't remember them very well now. Strange, isn't it? How we can forget the most important people in our lives. Mark swallowed hard, fighting a swell of emotion. It must be hard. Sometimes, she admitted, with a momentary lucidity that appeared now and then, but other times, it feels like they're still here even if I can't see them clearly. like friendly shadows. That night, Mark sent one last message to Ryan before Sunday's dinner. She told me she remembers having picnics with us, not specifically us, but the feeling of it. That's something, right? Ryan's reply was his longest yet. Yeah, it's something. I've learned to appreciate those fragments. It's all she has left of us, and all we have left of her. See you Sunday, Mark. Mark stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't forgiveness or full reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement, a recognition that, in their own ways, they were enduring the same storm. The gradual loss of someone still physically present, but receding further each day. It was a start, a shared silence, where once there had only been emptiness. The shift was subtle at first. One ordinary Tuesday, Mark noticed that Margaret seemed quieter than usual. Her eyes, though often unfocused, looked even more distant. When he tried chatting with her about the garden, her responses came slowly and with little coherence. "Are you feeling okay today?" he asked, gently holding her hand. Margaret looked at him, blinking several times as if trying to refocus. "I'm tired, very tired." Mark alerted Nurse Elena, who checked Margaret's blood pressure and temperature. "A bit low, but nothing alarming," she noted. "We'll keep an eye on her, sometimes they just have bad days." The next day, Ryan got a call at work. Margaret had fallen while trying to get out of bed on her own. It wasn't serious, just bruises, but the incident raised concern among the medical team. The brothers met in the Green Meadows hallway, both looking worried. They hadn't seen each other since that Sunday dinner at Ryan's place, an evening that, though still tense, had been a significant step forward. "What exactly happened?" Mark asked, skipping any greetings. She tried to get up without calling anyone. She was disoriented. Ryan rubbed his tired eyes. "Happened once before, about 6 months ago. Dr. Phillips, the neurologist monitoring Margaret, found them in the waiting area. He was a middle-aged man with a gentle yet frank demeanor. After introductions, he led them to his office. Mrs. Ellis's condition is progressing," he explained, scrolling through notes on his tablet. "What we're seeing is consistent with entering a new stage of the disease." "What can we expect?" Mark asked, leaning forward. The doctor adjusted his glasses. "Increased confusion, especially in the evenings, what we call sundowning. Potential agitation, sometimes aggression, though that varies from patient to patient. Growing difficulty with daily tasks, dressing, personal hygiene, and eventually eating." Ryan, who had heard similar forecasts before, kept his gaze fixed on a point on the wall behind the doctor. Mark, for whom this was new, felt his throat constrict. "How long?" The question hung in the air. "Every patient is unique," Dr. Phillips replied with the diplomacy of someone who has had this conversation hundreds of times. "Some stabilize for months, even years. Others deteriorate more quickly." "What about pain?" Ryan asked abruptly, his eyes now locked on the doctor. "Is she in pain?" "We have no indication of physical pain at this point. The confusion and agitation stem more from disorientation than discomfort. We're watching closely, though." The doctor let them absorb the information before continuing. "I'd like to discuss some changes in her treatment. Small adjustments to her medication to help with agitation and prevent further falls." "What are our options?" Mark asked. "We could consider a stronger cholinesterase inhibitor combined with a mild anxiolytic for her most agitated periods," the doctor explained. "The goal is to keep your mother comfortable without over-sedating her." Ryan nodded, familiar with medical jargon after 2 years of dealing with this. "Side effects?" "Possible nausea at first, maybe some gastrointestinal discomfort. We'll monitor and adjust the doses as needed." The brothers exchanged a quick look, an unspoken consultation. "What can we do to help?" Mark asked after a pause. "Your presence is most important," Dr. Phillips replied. "Familiar faces, known voices, even if she doesn't consciously recognize them, there's a comfort that goes beyond memory." Ryan nodded in agreement, as if confirming what he already knew from experience. "Music, too. She responds well to music." "Excellent observation," the doctor said. "Positive sensory stimuli, music she liked, familiar scents, comforting textures, these can help minimize agitation." After the consultation, The brothers walked in silence down the hallway toward Margaret's room. They found her sitting on the bed, gazing out the window. A small bandage covered her temple, where she'd hit it when she fell. "Mum," Ryan called softly, using a word he knew she wouldn't associate with them anymore, but which he couldn't stop himself from using. Margaret turned slowly. Her gaze drifted around the room before settling on the two men in the doorway. "Hello," she said. No recognition in her voice, but the same polite tone that remained, even as so many other qualities had faded. Mark and Ryan exchanged a quick glance before fully entering the room. They sat, one on each side of the bed, like silent sentinels. In the days that followed, they found a routine without needing a formal agreement. Ryan came in the morning before work, and again in the early evening. Mark rearranged his own schedule to cover lunchtime and afternoons. When their schedules overlapped, they shared the space in a silence that gradually lost its tension. Margaret shifted between calm periods and moments of intense agitation. One particularly difficult afternoon, she refused to eat, pushing the tray with surprising strength for someone so frail. "I don't want this. I need to go home," she insisted, voice raised, eyes wide with a fear that broke the heart of anyone watching. "Thomas is waiting, I have to make dinner." Mark, who was alone with her at that moment, felt completely lost. Thomas, his father, had been gone for almost 20 years. Ryan arrived in the middle of the episode. To Mark's surprise, he didn't try to confront her with reality. "It's okay, Mum. Thomas knows you'll be a bit late today," he said calmly. "He wants you to eat first, so you'll have energy to cook later." The strategy worked. Margaret calmed almost instantly, nodding as though that explanation made perfect sense. She allowed Ryan to adjust her pillow and accepted a few spoonfuls of soup. Later, when she had fallen asleep, the brothers stepped into the hallway. "How do you know what to do?" Mark asked, genuinely impressed. Ryan shrugged, but not dismissively. "I learned over time. There's no point in forcing reality on her. It just causes more distress. It's better to follow her narrative, find a gentle way out of the confusion." Mark nodded, absorbing the lesson. "Thanks. I'm still learning." "We all are," Ryan replied without his usual coldness. "Each stage brings new challenges." The next morning, Mark arrived at the nursing home to find Ryan already there, helping a nurse change Margaret's bedding while she was assisted in the shower. "You didn't have to come so early," Ryan said, without the accusatory tone he might have used weeks before. "I wanted to be here," Mark answered simply. "I couldn't sleep much anyway." Ryan nodded, understanding without needing more words. They spent the rest of the morning in Margaret's room, one or the other always within her line of sight, even when she seemed unaware of their presence. During lunch, they managed to get her to eat some mashed potatoes and a few spoonfuls of gelatin, small victories that felt huge in context. "So the doctor said they'll start the new meds tonight," Ryan commented as he gently wiped the corner of Margaret's mouth. "I'll be here," Mark said. Ryan looked at him for a moment. "I have to pick up the kids from school, but I can come back afterward." "Don't worry, I'll stay with her. You need to be with your family too." Ryan hesitated, then nodded. "I'll bring you dinner later." "That's not necessary." "I know, but I'm bringing it anyway." This simple exchange, practical, unadorned, lacking any grand emotional overtures, was a significant step forward for the brothers. Margaret's worsening condition, in its cruel progression, had ironically pushed them toward a reconciliation that might never have happened otherwise. That evening, Ryan returned as promised, carrying a container of homemade stew. He found Mark reading softly to Margaret, who appeared to be dozing but occasionally opened her eyes as if to check he was still there. The brothers ate in shifts, one always staying at Margaret's side. They spoke little, only what was needed to coordinate care. But in the silent pauses, something was building, a bridge over years of resentment and absence. When the night nurse came to administer the new medication, Mark and Ryan stood by, asking questions about its expected effects and warning signs. "You two are very dedicated," the nurse remarked as she left. "It makes a difference, you know." They stayed long past normal visiting hours, an exception granted because of Margaret's condition. At some point, Ryan got up to stretch his legs and brought back 2 cups of coffee from the machine in the hallway. "Awful," he muttered, handing one to Mark. "Terrible," Mark agreed after a sip. "But it does its job." Sitting in uncomfortable chairs, sipping bad coffee while their mother slept under the new medication's effect, the brothers exchanged a look that said more than any conversation. They were both exhausted, worried, weighed down by responsibilities, but they were there, together, united by a purpose that superseded their differences. And in that silent gaze, there was more than fatigue. There was solidarity. The solidarity of brothers who, after years of distance, found themselves side by side again in the most fundamental human experience, caring for the one who once cared for them. Days at Green Meadows took on a rhythm of their own. Mark arrived early, around 8, bringing decent coffee from a nearby cafe. Ryan showed up at 9 after dropping his kids at school. They compared notes on Margaret's night, spoke briefly with the morning nurses, then settled in her room for the day. The new medication had stabilized her condition. There was no improvement. They knew that wouldn't happen, but there wasn't a dramatic decline either. Her episodes of agitation were less frequent, though more intense when they did occur. The confusion persisted, fluctuating between total disorientation and brief moments of relative clarity. The brothers learned to take turns without formal discussion. One would go to lunch while the other stayed, then they'd switch at dinner. Ryan left to pick up his children and returned later, often finding Mark still there, working on his laptop while Margaret slept. Mark had restructured his professional life accordingly, delegating tasks, conducting video meetings in the nursing home cafe, signing documents brought by Janet, whose patience for this new dynamic was surprisingly generous. The initial frost between the brothers gradually thawed, replaced by a practical camaraderie born of shared need. They were not exactly friends. There were still many wounds, too much lost time. But they were partners in this unexpected journey. One particularly calm Wednesday, Margaret slept peacefully, except for the occasional beep of distant equipment. She was in a deep sleep, which Dr. Phillips had assured them was beneficial, naturally restful, not just medication-induced. Mark sat by the window, watching a light rain pattern the glass. Ryan occupied the armchair by the bed, absently flipping through a magazine without really reading it. The silence between them was now comfortable, free of the tension that once filled every pause. It was the silence of people who had found their own cadence together. "Looks like it'll rain all day," Ryan remarked casually, looking out the window. Mark concurred. "Good for the garden. She always liked days like this." "Yeah, she used to say nature needs to cry sometimes, so everything could grow stronger afterward." Mark smiled softly. She had a saying for everything. She still does sometimes. "Yesterday she told me, apples don't fall far from the tree." No idea what she was referring to, but it came out perfectly, like she'd just remembered. They returned to their comfortable silence, each lost in his own thoughts. The rain picked up for a moment, drumming against the window, then settled back into a steady drizzle. Mark looked at his younger brother, really looked at him for perhaps the first time in years. He noticed the worry lines, the prematurely graying hair at Ryan's temples, the slightly hunched posture of someone carrying an invisible weight. Ryan looked older than his 38 years, worn down by responsibilities and worries. Something stirred within Mark, not a sudden revelation, but the culmination of weeks of reflection, observation, and forced self-evaluation. A tightness formed in his throat, and he felt his eyes grow misty. Ryan must have sensed the shift in the atmosphere because he glanced up from the magazine, seeing the expression on Mark's face. He frowned slightly, puzzled. "You okay?" Mark swallowed hard, trying to gather his thoughts. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind many times, but suddenly found his prepared words lacking. "Ryan," he started, voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry." The younger man stiffened slightly, as though not expecting this direction. He didn't reply, just waited for Mark to go on. "I let so much slip away in my life," Mark continued, now looking directly at Ryan. "I chased so many things, thinking they mattered, and only now do I see I gained everything but what was truly valuable. And I lost you both along the way." The words came more easily than he had expected, perhaps because they were true, perhaps because it was long past time. Ryan lowered his gaze for a moment, absorbing what Mark had said. His face was an unreadable mask, revealing nothing about whether the apology had touched him or reopened old wounds. The silence that followed felt heavy with tension. A second passed, then 5, then 10. Mark felt the crushing weight of expectation, the fear that he'd spoken too late. Finally, Ryan set the magazine aside and stood. For a terrible moment, Mark thought he might simply leave the room, rejecting the apology as insufficient after all the years. But Ryan didn't head for the door. In 2 strides, he was beside Mark's chair. Without a word, he leaned down and hugged him. It wasn't a hesitant or perfunctory hug. It was simple and whole. Ryan's arms wrapped firmly around Mark's shoulders. No reservation, no half measures. Mark froze for an instant, so startled by this unexpected acceptance that he didn't know how to respond. Then something within him, some barrier, some defense constructed over years of emotional isolation, simply gave way. He returned the embrace, clinging to his brother as though he were a lifeline in open water. He made no attempt to hide the tears running freely down his face. There was no need to pretend strength or control here, not now. The hug lasted as long as it needed to, enough time to convey what words never could, to start filling the emptiness of years of absence. When they finally let go, Ryan stepped back and looked at his older brother, his own eyes wet, but with a small smile. "We're here now," he said simply. 3 words, nothing grand or poetic, just a calm statement of a shared present moment, of them finally meeting, truly meeting after all these years. Mark nodded, not trusting his voice. Ryan returned to his armchair, picked up his magazine again, but didn't open it. He glanced at Margaret, still sleeping soundly, unaware of the small miracle that had just taken place. "She'd be happy," Ryan observed after a few moments. "She always said we'd understand one day." "Understand what?" "That we're brothers. That it means something beyond fights and differences, time and distance." He shrugged, the gesture now more relaxed, less guarded. "She was right, I guess." Mark looked back at the window. The rain had subsided, and a ray of sunshine was breaking through the clouds, creating golden reflections on the drops still clinging to the glass. They didn't speak again that morning. They didn't need to. The miracle they'd just witnessed spoke for itself. They both knew it wouldn't be easy. There were years of hurts, assumptions, life choices that had separated them, but something had fundamentally changed in that simple exchange. A seed had been planted between brothers. There was no rush now, no demands. Just 2 men, side by side, united by their love for the woman sleeping peacefully in that bed, and perhaps for the first time in decades, truly united by something else as well, the understanding that, despite everything, they were family. They were there now for whatever remained of Margaret, and for whatever at last might flourish between them. Weeks turned into months. Fall gave way to winter, and the days grew shorter, darkness falling earlier. Life at Green Meadows continued, shifting subtly as Margaret's needs changed. One especially quiet late afternoon found the brothers seated in Margaret's room, as was their habit, one on each side of the bed. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light through the window and transforming the plain, institutional room into something almost intimate. They hadn't switched on any artificial lights yet, preferring the natural glow that softened the room's edges. Margaret was awake, propped up against her pillows. She wore a pale blue nightgown Ryan's wife, Sarah, had bought for her, and her white hair was neatly brushed, thanks to Elena, who took special care with her patient. The afternoon passed in a comfortable silence. Ryan leafed through a magazine, occasionally glancing at his mother to check that she remained calm. Mark read work messages on his phone, responding briefly to the most urgent ones. Then they noticed Margaret watching them, not with her usual vacant gaze, but with an intensity they hadn't seen in a long time. Her eyes moved slowly from Ryan's face to Mark's and back again. There was something different about her expression, a clarity, a presence that had been absent for months. Ryan realized it first. He set the magazine aside and leaned closer. "Mom, are you okay?" Margaret didn't answer right away. She kept looking at both her sons, as though trying to solve a complex puzzle. Her eyes, the very same brown eyes Mark had inherited, seemed more alert. Her lips moved silently, as if practicing words that couldn't quite form. Mark put his phone away, noticing the change too. He exchanged a quick, hopeful yet cautious look with Ryan. Both had learned not to get their hopes up. "Mom?" Mark ventured softly. Margaret blinked, as if his voice had brought her back from somewhere far away. Her gaze settled on Mark for a long moment. Then slowly, she raised her hand and touched his face, her trembling fingers tracing his features. "Mark," she said, her voice almost a whisper. His name, so simple, landed in the silent room like a stone dropped into still water. Mark felt his breath catch. Next to him, Ryan went perfectly still. Margaret turned to Ryan then, extending her other hand toward him. "Ryan," she said, just as clearly. Ryan took her hand gently, holding it as if it were incredibly fragile. "Yes, Mom," he responded, voice trembling. Tears filled Margaret's eyes as she looked from one son to the other. A smile, genuine, full of recognition and love, lit up her lined face. "My sons," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My boys." Mark felt as though the world had momentarily stopped spinning. All the nursing home noises faded, the distant clatter of dinner preparations, the soft voices of nurses in the corridor, the hum of a TV in a nearby room. Only this moment remained, these words, the look of recognition in his mother's eyes. Ryan let out a shaky breath, as if he'd been struck. He squeezed Margaret's hand more firmly, tears streaming down his face freely. You remember us?" he asked, barely audible. Margaret nodded slowly. "My sons," she repeated like a talisman, something she held on to. "You're here. Together." Mark moved closer, taking Margaret's other hand. "We're here, Mom," he said, trying to steady his own voice. "Both of us." She looked at him, eyes moist but perfectly lucid. "Mark," she repeated, savoring the name. "You came back." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. "Yes," he managed to say, voice choked. "I'm sorry it took me so long." Margaret squeezed his hand. "You're here now, that's what matters." Mark couldn't hold back his tears. Leaning in, still gripping her hand, he murmured, "Mom, forgive me for everything, for staying away so long, for only now realizing what really matters." Margaret let go of her son's hands and, in a move that surprised both of them, opened her arms wide. It was an invitation, an embrace that transcended words. Mark leaned into her, letting himself be held by arms that were frail yet surprisingly strong. He cried unreservedly against his mother's chest, just as he had in the far-off days of childhood. "I always knew you'd come back," she murmured into his hair. "Always." Ryan watched in silence, tears in his own eyes, witnessing a moment he had often doubted would ever come. There was so much in that embrace, forgiveness, reunion, unconditional love, that words could never fully convey. When Mark finally pulled away, Margaret turned to Ryan. There was a clarity in her eyes, a conscious presence they hadn't seen in so long. "You took care of me," she said simply. "All this time?" Ryan only nodded, unable to speak through the lump in his throat. "My boys," Margaret said, looking at them both. "Together again, that's all I ever wanted." The three of them talked for nearly an hour, the longest, most coherent conversation they'd had in years. Margaret asked about the grandchildren, about Mark's work, about Ryan's home. There were moments of confusion, times she lost her train of thought. But she always came back, as if determined to make the most of this unexpected window of lucidity. As dusk approached, Margaret showed signs of fatigue. Her eyes, bright and focused moments before, began to droop. Her sentences grew shorter, sometimes unfinished. "I think I need to rest," she finally said, sinking deeper into the pillows. "Sure, Mom," Ryan agreed softly. "We'll stay right here." Margaret smiled, already half asleep. "My sons," she murmured once more before her eyes closed completely. The brothers stayed silent by her side as she drifted off, each absorbing what had just happened. They didn't speak. There was no need. The miracle they had witnessed spoke for itself. About half an hour later, once Margaret's breathing indicated a deep sleep, Elena came in quietly to check her evening medications. She sensed something different in the room and gave the brothers a questioning look. "She recognized us," Ryan whispered, careful not to disturb his mother. "Fully, we talked. She was herself." Eleanor smiled gently but without surprise. "It happens sometimes," she said, checking an IV. "We call them clarity moments. They're rare but precious." "Will it happen again?" Mark asked, still emotional. The nurse adjusted Margaret's blanket with care. "Maybe, maybe not. Every case is different." She looked at the brothers compassionately. "What matters is that you were here when it happened." Once Eleanor left, Mark and Ryan remained at the bedside, watching their mother sleep. The room was almost completely dark now, lit only by a soft glow from the corridor through the half-open door. "Do you think she'll remember when she wakes up?" Mark asked after a long stretch of quiet. Ryan shook his head slowly. "Probably not. But that's okay. We remember." A few hours later, in the late evening, Margaret stirred again. She glanced around, confused, until her gaze landed on her sons. "Hello," she said politely, in the same tone she used with strangers. "Who might you be?" The moment was gone. The window had closed as abruptly as it had opened. The Margaret who recognized them was once again hidden behind the veil of her disease. Mark felt a stab of sadness, but no disappointment. He knew this was how the illness worked, brief moments of light, followed by long stretches of confusion. "We're friends," Ryan said kindly, "just checking in on you." "Oh, how nice," Margaret murmured, drifting back to sleep. "Visitors are always welcome." Her voice faded into deep slumber. Mark and Ryan looked at each other, not with sadness, but with shared understanding and gratitude. They'd had their moment of recognition, brief but real, a gift in the midst of a difficult journey. They needed nothing more. That fleeting moment of connection, that embrace, those words, "My sons, my boys," were enough. One last recognition, perhaps, but complete in its significance. Ryan gently placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. "Let's go grab some coffee," he suggested. "She'll sleep peacefully now." Mark nodded and stood. Before leaving, he leaned over and kissed Margaret's forehead. "Good night, Mom," he whispered. "Thank you." Side by side, the brothers left the room, carrying with them the treasure of that moment. Even if it never repeated, it had changed everything. Life at Green Meadows resumed its usual pace after that rare moment of clarity. Margaret returned to her usual state, gentle, polite, but disconnected from the world around her. The doctors explained it was common for Alzheimer's patients to have those occasional flashes of awareness, like lightning in a dark night, bright, revealing, and fleeting. The days grew warmer as winter gave way to spring. Windows at the nursing home stayed open longer, letting in fresh air scented with blooming flowers and damp earth. Margaret became quieter still. She attended fewer activities, preferring to sit and watch people pass by, her gaze seeming to see beyond what was in front of her. Mark and Ryan adapted to this new phase, still visiting regularly, but speaking less and touching more, holding her hand as they read aloud or simply sitting close by. They'd learned that sometimes the language of care needs no words. One particularly lovely April morning, Ryan arrived earlier than usual. He found Mark already in Margaret's room, helping her finish breakfast. "Look who's here," Mark said to Margaret as Ryan entered. "Another visitor for you today." Margaret offered Ryan the same polite smile she gave everyone, with no recognition, yet with the sweetness that remained even as everything else faded. "Good morning," Ryan greeted, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "I brought you something." From a small bag, he pulled out a light straw hat with a pale blue ribbon. "To shield you from the sun," he explained, placing it gently on her head. Margaret touched the brim curiously, then smiled, seemingly pleased. "It's a beautiful day outside," Ryan remarked, throwing Mark a meaningful look. "I thought we could take a stroll in the garden." Mark immediately understood. "Great idea. What do you think, Margaret?" "Some fresh air." She nodded, although it wasn't clear if she really comprehended. Still, she didn't resist when they helped her stand. Ryan had also brought a light jacket, which Mark helped her put on, while Elena, entering to collect the breakfast tray, looked on approvingly. "I'll let reception know you'll be outside," the nurse said. "Take your time. It's good for her." The three headed into the hallway, Margaret walking slowly between her sons, one arm linked with each. Her steps were more uncertain now, shorter, more cautious, but she could still move with their support. At the door leading to the garden, Margaret paused briefly. Ryan and Mark waited patiently, letting her adjust to the idea of going outdoors. After a few seconds, she gave a small nod, and they continued. The Green Meadows garden was one of the home's best features. Well kept, with flat walkways perfect for those with limited mobility, and multiple flower beds creating a natural rainbow of blooms. Benches were placed strategically beneath large trees that offered generous shade. The morning sun was mild, neither too hot nor too weak. A light breeze rustled the leaves and carried the sweet scent of newly opened flowers. Birds sang cheerfully, providing a natural soundtrack. Margaret seemed to come alive a bit in the garden. Her eyes, often unfocused, appeared brighter as they scanned her surroundings. Her body, usually tense, visibly relaxed. They walked slowly around the perimeter, stopping whenever something caught Margaret's attention. She lingered in front of a bed of daisies, leaning slightly to get a closer look. "Pretty," she commented, one of the few words she said that day. "Just like you," Ryan replied softly, helping steady her. At another point, an orange butterfly landed on a nearby shrub. Margaret froze, observing it with almost childlike wonder. She reached out slowly as though wanting to touch it, but the insect flew away before she could. To the brothers' surprise, Margaret laughed, a clear sound they hadn't heard for weeks. After about half an hour of gentle strolling, Margaret began to show signs of fatigue. Wordlessly, Mark and Ryan guided her to a bench beneath a blooming apple tree, helping her sit between them. From there, she had a perfect view of the entire garden. She took a deep breath, as though trying to absorb everything she saw. Then, to her son's surprise, she closed her eyes and tilted her face to the sun, as if relishing a moment of pure contentment. "She looks happy," Ryan murmured, glancing at Mark over their mother's head. "Even without remembering, and she feels," Mark replied, watching Margaret's serene face, her lips faintly curved in a smile. They sat like that for a long time, silent, simply existing together in a space beyond words. The birdsong, the breeze in the leaves, the distant hum of bees among the flowers, all merged into a natural symphony that felt perfect. Then, without warning or apparent reason, Margaret opened her eyes. She looked first at Ryan, then at Mark, and finally at the garden. Slowly, as though directed by a part of her that still remembered, she extended her hands, one to each side, and clasped her son's hands. She said nothing. Perhaps she had no words. But her eyes shone for an instant with something that transcended speech, a knowledge beyond memory, something that existed in her very bones, her core. It was as though, without being able to name them or recall their shared stories, she knew, at some fundamental level, that she was surrounded by love, that these two men beside her meant safety, care, belonging. Ryan and Mark gently squeezed her hands in return, forming a small chain of silent connection. None of the three spoke. They didn't need to. That moment contained all that was necessary. For the brothers, this was enough. It wasn't the complete recognition they'd briefly experienced on that golden afternoon weeks earlier. It was something else, more subtle, perhaps even deeper in its simplicity. It was the understanding that even when the mind fails, when memories slip away like sand, something remains. Something the disease can't erase, nor time nor distance. Right there on that garden bench under the blooming apple tree, with their hands joined and the spring sun warming their faces, the three formed a portrait of reconciliation and acceptance, a family navigating the delicate space between what stays and what goes, between what can be reclaimed and what must be let go. And for all of them, in that moment, it was enough. Spring turned into summer, and the changes weren't limited to the seasons. Something had shifted permanently in Mark, as though the ice that had once encased his heart had melted, allowing new possibilities. Margaret entered an even quieter phase. The doctors explained it was common at this stage. First, the memories vanish, then the words, until all that remains is a physical presence, a fragile vessel of what once was a life brimming with stories and emotions. She rarely spoke now. Sometimes days went by without her uttering a single word. Yet there was life in her eyes, not the spark of recognition or comprehension, but a gentle presence that shone especially when her sons were near. Mark and Ryan settled into a comfortable routine. They visited on alternating schedules during the week, and together on Sundays. They'd learned the language of silence, how to show love through small acts, how to read aloud without knowing if she understood, how to adjust her pillow or brush her hair with the care she deserved. But the deepest changes had taken place within Mark. After 2 decades of focusing solely on his career, he revamped his entire life. He delegated major responsibilities in his company, promoted trusted executives to roles he once believed only he could fill, and drastically cut back his workload. The time he gained wasn't just for his mother, it was for the little things he'd dismissed as trivial or unnecessary. Grabbing a weekly coffee with Ryan at a cafe near his brother's office, occasionally visiting old college friends, calling former colleagues he'd lost touch with. One July afternoon, while they walked through the halls of Green Meadows after meeting with the doctor, Mark realized how easily he could talk with Ryan now. The barriers that once stood between them had eroded, replaced by a camaraderie that, if not quite the same as their childhood closeness, had its own strength and worth. "How are the kids?" Mark asked, referring to his niece and nephew, whom he now saw regularly. He'd become a frequent guest at Ryan's home these past few months. "Charlie's obsessed with dinosaurs," Ryan answered with a smile. "Ellie wants to learn piano. Sarah thinks it's too soon, but I might at least set up some trial lessons. She's got her mother's musical talent," Mark observed. Ryan nodded, pausing briefly to greet a passing nurse. As they continued toward Margaret's room, Mark felt an urge to express something that had been building in him for weeks. "How you know? I thought I had everything," he began, eyes forward as they walked side by side. "But really, I was just lost, getting you all back. It was like I found myself again." Ryan looked at his older brother, surprised by the uncommon frankness. A slight smile appeared on his lips, not sarcastic or bitter as it might have been months ago, but genuinely warm and accepting. They reached Margaret's door and walked in quietly. She was asleep, looking peaceful, her delicate hands resting on the white sheets. Her breathing was steady, chest rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. The brothers took their usual seats, one on each side of the bed, with no need for discussion. Their bodies already knew this routine, a silent dance practiced over months. Mark studied his mother's sleeping face. The lines time and illness had etched on it, the evident fragility in bones that seemed more pronounced each week. Yet there was also a serenity there, a peace that transcended her suffering. "My soul was empty," he said softly, finishing his earlier thought. "Now, it's home." Ryan didn't reply verbally. He didn't have to. The silence they shared now was comfortable, filled with everything they no longer needed to articulate. The room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon streaming through the window, painting delicate patterns on the walls. On the bedside table, the picnic photo Mark had brought months before remained in a place of honor, a snapshot of a whole family in a time that wouldn't return, yet still echoed in their transformed present. Margaret kept sleeping, unaware of her son's presence, yet somehow enveloped by it. It was a paradox they had learned to live with. She was simultaneously there and not there, part of them and apart from them, joined by bonds the mind no longer recognized, but that endured nonetheless. Mark closed his eyes for a moment, feeling strangely whole. Professional success, money, status. None of it had filled the void he now realized he'd been carrying for years. It took losing his mother to illness to find his brother again, and through Ryan to find himself. In the room's quiet, there was a kind of peace only built through ongoing presence, through daily commitment. It wasn't perfect or absolute. There was still pain, regret, the acute awareness of lost time. But there was also acceptance, forgiveness, and the chance to create something new from the ruins. At last, Mark knew where he belonged, not in the corporate skyscrapers or on magazine covers, but here, by the side of those he loved, fully present for small moments, focused on what truly mattered. In the hush of that room, as the sun inched toward the horizon, there was a silent certainty. Some endings are really new beginnings in disguise, and for Mark Collins, that was more than enough. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.